Hey everyone, Pastor Rich here. We are in chapter 12 and 13 of our book study, Irresistible. We're doing it a little different today. Had some things come up, and so we're going to do it live, and then we'll post it over to YouTube. I had a question someone raised from last week. Where I made a comment from Andy's previous chapters, I think chapters 10 and 11, where he talked about how Paul was very violent towards Christians when he was on a mission for the Jews, for Jewish people, and as a rabbi, as a leader, he was sent on this mission to persecute Christians, to try to wipe out Christianity and this heretical apostasy that was a wrong form of Judaism. And Paul, as a good Jewish person who was a leader, who was studying to be a rabbi, was part of the cause to try to wipe it out and get rid of it through persecution. And he was very violent. And then he has this conversion experience and he becomes a Christian, and never again do we see him being violent. He can be harsh with his words and challenging with his words, but he's not violent. Why? Because he met Jesus. And someone just sent a question about, what does Jesus mean in Luke 22? I think it's 35 through 38. Sell your purse and bag and go buy a sword, and he knows he's leaving soon. And what Jesus is saying there, he's using the sword figuratively, and he's saying you're going to face some trials and hardships. And he had sent them out before in the Gospel of Luke, and he told them, bring nothing. This time he says, you need to bring your purse and your bags and a cloak. And he said, if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak. And then they're like, look, we have 2 swords. And he's like, no, that's enough. Basically, y'all aren't getting it. I don't mean swords literally. I'm talking about some of the things you're going to face in the future. So, just to clarify that question. So we are in chapter 12 and 13 of this book, and Andy begins talking about Hebrews and how the whole point of Hebrews is to show that the old covenant is obsolete and that Jesus is superior, which is true. He says that obsolete doesn't mean bad, right? It just means it had its purpose. It was temporary. It served its purpose, and then it ended. And then he goes into a little bit of history about the early church fathers blending, not following Paul's advice, and blending old covenant with new covenant, and some things that led to that weren't great, like the Crusades and anti-Semitism and some of these things. And then he ends the chapter saying that Jesus, the Apostle Paul, the author of Hebrews, and the Jerusalem Council have given us permission to unhitch our faith from God's covenant with Israel. Actually, they didn't just give us permission to do it, they highly recommended it. And then he says, mix and match, and you don't get the best of either, you get the worst of both. And it sounds like he's going to go into the next section a little bit about what some of the worst of both has been. Anyway, chapter 13, he shares 5 suggestions about ways to unhitch from the Old Testament. And so I'm going to just share those 5 ways. First, he says, New Covenant folks should embrace the decision of the Jerusalem Council regarding our relationship to the Old Covenant and everything associated with it. It's not our covenant. It wasn't given to us, and it's not binding on us. So the Old Covenant wasn't given to us. It's not binding on us. It's the first way to understand this. Second thing is, he says, accept the Old Testament for what it actually is rather than what you were taught that it was when we were a child. Right? It's history. It's for inspiration. It's for application. And that this in no way lessens the significance of the Old Covenant. The third thing he says is resist the temptation to resolve theological, ideological, or ethical conflicts between the Old Testament and the teaching of Jesus and the apostles. Neither Jesus nor the Apostle Paul felt the need to do so. In other words, everything doesn't have to harmonize between the Old Testament and New Testament. Everything doesn't have to harmonize between the Old Covenant and New Covenant because God operated under a different set of relational rules in the Old Covenant that he does now in the New Covenant that he's established with his people through Jesus. God hasn't changed, but the way he relates to his people has changed. And Andy walks through that. The next one is the promises found in most of the Old Testament are not your promises. Yours are better, right? When these promises were made in the Old Testament, they were made within a specific context to a specific person or group of people. And we need to remember that. We need to read the Old Testament in its context. And then finally, the Old Testament is for inspiration, not application. He says, don't do what some of the heroes of the faith in the Old Testament did. Will go to jail, which I thought was pretty funny. But we can be inspired by their faithfulness, their endurance, the way they forgive, right? The way Joseph forgives. And all these things that happen are so powerful. And we can be inspired by them and learn from them and grow in our faith because of them. So Andy ends the chapter, and I just want to read the first half of page 170. I think this is a good summary of what Andy's message has been about all of this, and he even quotes N.T. Wright, which is one of my favorite New Testament scholars. So I'm going to read this. Even in the face of all the challenge and transition, we should always affirm the goodness and divine origin of the Old Covenant. I feel like Andy's been pretty down on the Old Covenant, so it's good to hear him write that. After all, it's the cocoon that brought us life, light, and a kingdom that has no end. It's the backstory for the greatest story. It was the nanny whose purpose was to point God's people toward the one who was to come. It's the history of God's chosen people through whom he would eventually step foot personally onto planet Earth. The Old Covenant is a perpetual reminder that God keeps his promises, that his love endures forever. Yet it is obsolete. And he even quotes earlier, or in the previous chapter, he quotes Hebrews that says it's obsolete. But it's an obsolete covenant for which Jesus' followers should be forever grateful. N.T. Wright summarized it perfectly. The Torah, the law of Moses at Sinai, is given for a specific period of time, and it is then set aside. Not because it was a bad thing, now happily abolished, but because it was a good thing whose purpose had now been accomplished. So when Andy says it's obsolete, I almost felt like earlier in some of his writings, when he said it was obsolete, it was almost like he was also saying that it's not important. But he's not saying that. He's saying it is important. It was temporary. It served its purpose. And it was meant to be temporary. It was meant to have a time frame where it ended and something new emerged. And that's exactly what happened in Christ. So anyway, just that's chapters 12 through 13. We'll get into the next section next week. And I look forward to that. So anyway, thanks for joining me. If you have any questions, again, let me know, whether it's in the comments or shoot me an email, rich@cccasheville.org. Thanks. Take care. Bye.